Chapter 49 is the last chapter in this unit, and we're going to briefly talk about some program music at the end of the 19th century. Impressionism, you may have heard of when thinking about painting, like Monet. It was a French movement, and the idea of Impressionism was the sensation that the eye has when looking at something, and also really depicting the change of light and color. And so, different painters like Monet, Manet, Degas, Renoir, these are famous painters from the Impressionistic era in Paris, particularly. And another theme that was coming at this time period was symbolism. There was a parallel development in poetry, and it was a literary revolt against tradition. So, more ideas of not exact representation, but symbols, abstract qualities, suggestions. And there were a few different writers that were famous for that. Mallarmé and Verlaine were two symbolist poets. If you look at their writings, quite interesting. Very much a break from tradition. That idea of breaking tradition continued in the late 1800s and carried us into the turn of the century. It was inspired by Impressionists and Symbolists and those movements of trying to do something that was not real life representation, that broke the rules and created some type of an ambiguity and subtlety. There was an interest in modal and exotic scales, and so there was a change in the timbre and the sound of music because of that. Dissonance was freed as a use all on its own rather than the transition to a consonant chord. Typically, dissonance is the tension, consonance is the resolution or the settling of the music, the peaceful sound, and you would usually never have one without the other. Dissonance would always be followed by consonance, but during this time period, dissonance became something that could stand on its own, meaning it didn't have to resolve. That tension could just stay there. And so that was a very new sound in music, something that makes some people feel uncomfortable in hearing because it feels unfinished. That might be represented also in ninth chords, uh, floating harmonies. So there's some very different sounds coming out of the music from this time period. This is a picture of a Monet painting, excuse me, and gives you the idea of that playing of light on the water. This is a symbolist painting by Rodin. So in music, continuing on, we've got still very rich orchestral color, but a little less rigid rhythms, a lot more free rhythms, and they may mute the brass a little more to create more subtlety. And they may use the harp or the celestia to create a more ethereal sound. Claude Debussy is actually an important French Impressionist composer. They weren't just painters, but he was an Impressionist composer. He was very talented musically, shocked his professors when he went to the Paris Conservatory with some very unique sounds and harmonies and breaking of the rules. But he won the grand prize Prix de Rome at age 22. So he was very quickly successful in the world of composition. He wrote an opera which had international success, Pelléas and Mélisande, in 1902. There was a Paris exhibition in 1889 that brought with it uh, artists and things from all around the world, and that exposed him to some non-Western styles. And another thing that he did was help establish the French art song. His music is going to have light, airy textures to it, subtle expressions. He doesn't have a huge amount of output, orchestral compositions and dramatic works, chamber music, piano music, and songs. His best known orchestral work is called The Afternoon of the Faun, and it's going to have this idea of antiquity, mythological, and ethereal in some ways. It's a loose ABA structure. You're going to hear the flute melody in the lower register, very chromatic. You'll hear the harp doing glissandos. You'll hear some conversations in the horns, free rhythms in the clarinet, introducing the idea in the B section with a new theme, and then the return of the A section with cymbals, and then the piece really dissolves at the end into silence. Follow along with the listening guide to give you a clearer understanding of the timeline